In this lesson, we're going to start discussing the keyboard. This is going to take a couple different lessons to finish, but for today we're going to get started with it. The first thing you need to know is the names of the notes on the keyboard. So the way that you can figure this out, and this is true on any keyboard, is you find the group of 2 black keys. So the black keys are in groups of 2, 3, 2, 3. That's a pattern all the way down in piano. You're going to find a group of 2 black keys. You're going to go to the left, and that's going to be a C. Okay, so you can find any 2 black keys, and the note to the left is going to be a C. Then you just use your musical alphabet. Going forward, you say your alphabet forward, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Going backwards, you could start here, but you can also start here and go backwards, B, A, G, F, E, D, and C. So those are the names of the notes of the white keys on the keyboard, and we'll talk about the black keys here in a little bit, okay? All right, your first vocabulary word here is interval. Interval is the distance between 2 notes. The distance between 2 notes. Now, let me show you that. So interval is not a word that's only used in music. We use interval when we're talking about other things. So for example, if you were doing a math problem and you were measuring things out, you might talk about how big is the interval between these 2 marks, the 2 big marks. What's that interval? Maybe it's 2 inches, okay? This then would be a bigger interval. That would be 4 inches compared to 2 inches. You also hear people talk about intervals when they're doing like working out, and you like high intensity training, and you do interval training. And so sometimes you use intervals to measure time. So interval is talking about a unit of measurement and how you measure things out. So an interval in music is talking about the distance between 2 notes. Now, if you're playing a wind instrument, you might be just talking about the distance between 2 notes in sound, and you can't really see it. And that's why it's important to understand how it looks on a keyboard, because that's going to make it make more sense to you when you're playing it on your instrument. Okay, so the next definition is half step. A half step is the smallest possible interval. The smallest possible interval. Okay, now I'm not going to write this down because I don't consider this part of the definition, but I also sometimes will say 2 touching notes. Okay, now what you have to understand on the keyboard is that these 2 notes here, they're touching, because this key right here is touching this key all the way up and down. If you just look right there, you can see they're touching all the way up and down the keyboard. Okay. However, this note is not touching this note because this key here is in between them. So the black keys are only half as long, because when you play piano, it makes it easier for your fingers to reach certain notes if they're not all the same length. The notes would be too skinny and too many if you didn't have them up here like this. But really, this sound, if you're just talking about the sound the note makes, is in between these 2 notes. So this note's F, this note is in between F and G. And then this note is G. So you can either look at the keyboard like this to figure out which notes touch, or you can just understand in your mind that that black key really is totally in between those 2 notes. So these 2 notes are touching, these 2 notes are touching, this black key is touching this white key is touching this black key, and so on. Okay, so the half step is the smallest possible interval, or 2 touching notes. So from E to F is a half step. From F to this black key here, which we haven't named yet, that's a half step because they're touching and it's the smallest possible interval. From this black key to G is a half step. From G to this black key is a half step. From F to G is not a half step. Okay, we'll talk about that later. But from F to G would not be a half step because there is a note in between. Again, here it looks like they're touching, but you realize that really there's a key in between. Okay, so a half step is the smallest possible interval. All right, the next one is a flat. First of all, I want you to draw a flat. Let me show you this picture. It looks to me like a flattened B. It's a B and it looks like a flattened B. Now, coincidentally, the most common flat is B flat, but just understand that that flat symbol can make any note a flat. It just happens to look like a B, okay? So, and the definition is a flat lowers a note a half step. Lowers a note a half step. So first of all, let's be sure we know what lowers mean. So a flat lowers a note a half step. On a keyboard, this way is lower. You can go and write this on your paper. And this way is higher. So this would be the lowest note on this keyboard, and this would be the highest, okay? So if we're gonna lower a note a half step, we're gonna go this way, okay? So let's look at our G. All right, so we want to find a note that is a half step lower than this note. So we look at our definition of half step, the smallest possible interval, lower. So that means we're gonna be on this key right here, this black key, okay? Because we're gonna go down, lower a half step. So that means that this key right here is gonna be called G flat, okay? All right, so this key then is, here's your A, this key is gonna be A flat. This one is gonna be B flat. Okay, go ahead and pause. Well, let's do these two together just to be sure you get them right. E, lowered a half step. Now, remember, we could color this in and all that, but we know that this note's in between these. So if we go down a half step from E, that's E flat. And then this one would be D flat. All right, this is gonna be the same as this because it just repeats. This is an octave, that's a group of 7 notes, and then it repeats up here. An octave is 8 notes from one note to the next. We'll talk about that more later. But if it's one way here, it's gonna be the same pattern here. So go ahead and pause the video and go and fill that in on your own. So you have D flat, E flat, G flat, A flat, B flat. Now, as far as E and F and B and C, we're going to talk about that in the next video. We'll come back to those and discuss those a little bit more, okay? All right, now the next one that we're going to talk about is a sharp. A sharp looks like this, and it's, you could say it's a tic-tac-toe or a pound sign. You guys probably think of it as a hashtag though. All right, so it raises a note a half step. Raises a note a half step. Okay, so now we're going to go up a half step and we're going to name that note sharp. So let's start on F, go up a half step, you're on this key again, and it's going to be called F sharp. Well, this is already called G flat, right? But it's also going to be called F sharp. And we'll talk about that more in the next lesson as well, but it has 2 names. That key has 2 names, okay? All right, so let's do that for the rest of them. So C raised up a half step is C sharp. It's the same key as D flat. D sharp is the same key as E flat. Another name for A flat would be this note raised up, so G sharp. And then this one raised up would be A sharp, okay? All right, we'll talk more about that. Go and finish these out real quick. So you've got C sharp, D sharp, you can pause if you need more time, F sharp, G sharp, and A sharp. Now I'm going quickly because I know these really well. You have to be careful that you don't accidentally forget about E and F and B and C. You have to look at the note F sharp, okay? So double check that you've got all that right. Don't go so fast so you miss something. All right, the next one is a natural. A natural cancels a flat or a sharp. And the way I write a natural is I do an L and a 7. Okay, a natural is kind of like an L and a 7. A natural cancels a flat or a sharp. Cancels a flat or sharp. Okay, and again, if it takes you longer to write than me, just pause the video for a minute, okay? All right, so we're not going to mark any naturals on here, but all of these notes are naturals. All of the white key notes are naturals. So let's say you're playing a song and you have a lot of B flats, but then you want the person playing to play this note, a B. You would possibly, depending on the music, you would put a natural sign, okay? Or let's say that you have a D flat and then the next note you want it to be a D. You can put a natural sign. It cancels a flat or sharp. You don't have to totally understand that yet. You just need to understand that if you have flats and sharps and you're ready to go back to the regular white keys, you can use naturals to help that happen, okay? So a natural cancels a flat or sharp. Now, I'm going to add one thing, and this is actually not on the full filled in one that you guys have. These three things right here are called accidentals. Okay, so that's not officially part of this lesson, but it's handy to know that these three things are called accidentals: flat, sharps, and naturals. So a natural cancels a flat or sharp. You can just think of that as it returns it back to its natural placement, its natural note, okay? A flat, I think of that, it lowers a note. I think of like a flat tire. So if you have a car with a flat tire, the car goes down, right? And so a flat lowers a note a half step. A sharp, though, let's think if you had a sharp tack and there was a sharp tack and you accidentally stepped on it, your foot would go up, right? If you accidentally step on something sharp, your foot's going to pop back up. So a sharp raises a note, a flat lowers a note, okay? And then the natural cancels a flat or sharp. Okay, that's as far as we're going to go on this lesson. So just as a quick review, if you want to find a C on a keyboard, you look for your two black keys, you go to the left, that's a C, you use your musical alphabet to fill in the rest. An interval is the distance between two notes, so these two notes are a small interval, these two notes are a big interval. A half step is the smallest possible interval, remembering that these black keys are actually in between the white keys. So this is a natural half step, this is a 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 half step. From the white to the white here is not a half step because there's something in between. We'll talk about that more in a later lesson. A flat lowers a note a half step. For example, A, going that way, lower goes to the left, higher goes to the right. So A flat would be this key. Another name for that is G sharp, because G going to the right is G sharp. And then a natural cancels a flat or sharp. And these three things, flat, sharps, and naturals, are called accidentals. The link to the next lesson in this video series can be found in the description below.